Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for our Comics Creator Chat. Today, I'm hanging out with my friend, comics creator Sierra Barnes, who has a new graphic novel dropping with Dark Horse Comics, the second installment of her series, Hans Vogel Is Dead. To give you a time warp moment, it was way back in October of 2021 that we first spoke about Volume 1 on Twitter Spaces, of all places. And yes, I will always call it Twitter. The book was funding on Kickstarter then. Time flies, and the landscape of things has certainly changed, has it not?
That I feel like I've been hit by the time ray. That's not a thing, but it
Mhm.
could be. Yeah,
Where's Tim Curry?
2021.
We need
Wow.
Tim Curry.
Yeah, it's just a stop to yeah. So that's the time warp. God. Anyway, yeah. Now so many years and many pages later, we've got 2 books now that I can hold up for you. My
Woohoo!
author copy has got in, so I'm able to wave them at people ahead of time. Very excited.
Nice.
But
What's
yeah,
it feel like to get the
5
author
long years
copies
ago.
in?
It was a shock. Because this book has been plagued with production problems, and when the book was postponed for a week because of printer issues, I was kind of like half expecting to get an email saying, "Yeah, the book was on a ship in the Strait of Hormuz and was hit by a missile or something." So when they showed up on my porch, unannounced, I was ecstatic. And especially ecstatic because it was supposed to pour rain that day and it didn't, which is great. Because if I had come home to a box of 5 boxes of wet books, I would have been devastated. I felt it was fine, but it didn't rain. It's a Christmas miracle in July, and they look great, and I am so happy.
And no fascist missiles took out the book in 2026 that is talking about fascism. So there we go.
No missiles.
Yay!
Yeah, hooray.
Well, I
Oh,
want to start in a different way with this. So I want to start with a quote. Because I was when I was kinda digesting the book, I kept looking at those parallels between then and now. So, here's the quote: "The great masses of the people will more easily fall victims to a big lie than a small one." And that was Adolf Hitler in 1925. Notably directed at his political opponents and not as a strategy directive, which I thought was really, really interesting. And that's 8 years before the rise of the Nazi Party and feels kind of eerily prophetic in modern America and kind of a somber place to dive into Hans Vogel is Dead. But let's do a brief refresher for folks who are listening and may not be as familiar with the story. So give me the volume 1 quick beats breakdown.
absolutely. Yeah. Hans Vogel is a German pilot in World War II, lauded as a war hero, recipient of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and he gets shot down and killed in the Battle of Britain. Womp womp. But when he wakes up in an afterlife of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales he knew from his youth, he has to have a second chance at life and decide whether or not he's going to do what he did in life, go with the easiest option, live under a rising fascism in the fairy tale world, or do better this time around. So he's unpacking the fascism he learned growing up in Nazi Germany. He's trying to be a better person. He runs into Reineke, who is a 12-year-old girl cursed to look like a fox, and the two of them are negotiating this weird world of witches, werewolves, and the rising power of the Errol King, a shadowy figure whose I was going to say shadow influence is stretching across the land that Hans recognizes from his time alive. So, fairy tales and anti-fascism, two of the things that I love the most. Kissing on the mouth, because I can make him do that.
Yeah, they were leaving okay, here's my first attempt at German words here. So the
Yes.
Merchenwald? Did I get close to that?
Märchenwald. Yeah.
Alright, I was not too bad, not too bad.
Not too bad. Yeah.
But they were leaving the forest, and they were now headed to Heldentorm, so the
Yes.
castle in the mountains with Hans determined to take on the Erl King, and volume 1 was more focused on, as you were saying, reimagining some of grim fairy tales lore, so the setting was important as a reference point there in the forest. Volume 2 sees a lot more of the action in Heldentorm and the surrounding lands in the, um, here I'm going to try this one again. So, Białowieża, the forest?
Where Oh, Dunwald. Oh, Białowieża the Białowieża forest is the real world forest that Hans is in.
Okay,
Um,
okay, okay. And that's
that's in
like the
Poland, which
border
is very cool.
Poland.
Yes. A lot of
Yeah.
very cool, real life history, there.
Yeah, so the castle and the forest, why there specifically? Did you have a personal, like, association with either of those?
Yeah, so Heldentorm, is not a real place, but it is based off of a castle that was close to where I lived when I lived in Austria. A lot of
Okay.
the interiors and the exteriors are inspired by, the, fortress in Grein, which is a small but heroic city on the Danube in Austria that used to be a major hub for not only trade going up into Austria, but also for the Crusades, where it was in order for your trip to the Holy Land to count as a crusade, sort of legally, you had to collect a bunch of pilgrim badges from designated points that the Catholic Church would tell you, or would grant to cities because, of course, if you had to visit the city to get the badge, you have to pay the money, you have to pay the taxes. So a lot of
Right.
towns would financially very much benefit from this. And Grind was one of those very important strategic towns that had one of the required pilgrim badges. So it got a lot of money and prestige from that position. And as a result, the fortress, because it's a choke point on the Danube River, was very nice. If you ever get a chance to visit Upper Austria, I highly recommend it, and you will recognize many of the rooms and the exterior shots from this castle because I took a bunch of pictures while I was living there. And
Okay.
as for Białowieża Forest, which is I was not able to go there personally, but it is in German referred to as an Urwald, which means like a Ur is like a word that means like primeval or like original. It's got this context of like being something that is timeless and from which all things come or a bunch of other things come. And Białowieża is one of the oldest continuously standing forests in Europe. It has now and also had previously a bunch of endangered animals, and it was preserved by the Tsars for a very long time as a hunting ground. And
Yeah.
in World War I, the German army hunted it basically to extinction. When they captured the area, there was hunting culture in the German upper classes, which is something that I talk about a lot in Volume 2, is like it's very wild. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was like very caught in the imagination of this like German upper class hunting society that in a lot of ways imprinted itself on the Air Force at the time because a lot of the Air Force were these upper class Junkers, the noblemen, was this idea of keeping Poland at large, but specifically the Białowieża forest as a imperial hunting ground. And that's why Goering was like obsessed with it. And part of the reputation of the forest as a hunting ground was that the Polish people who were still living in the forest and were launching resistance efforts from it were considered or were treated as prey. They were
Okay.
referred to as bandits and would the same like language in German to going after bandits in the forest was the same language of hunting animals. So that sort of like through line to me reading about the culture of like the Luftwaffe occupation of this forest, the forest imagery, like intrinsic in fairy tales, this like muddling of human and animal, that was very inspirational uh for my work in this book.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the Luftwaffe, the pilots themselves were part of that hunting cult. Like, I just don't have a basis for it. But I found it fascinating how superstitious they were, which was a very interesting element in the book, and I went back, and so I discovered the Star of Africa and the cult of personality that was associated with that. So it was I really enjoyed that element of the book a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, one of those things where I was, like, doing research, and this was, like, years ago, and you're kind of like, "Dang, I don't know where the story is going to go." I'm kinda, like, thinking about things, and you find, like, the right book at the right moment, and it happened to be on, like, hunting cults in the Luftwaffe, and I was like, "Oh. Oh, this is it." Like, this is the piece just kind of fitted into place, and I was like, "Yeah, okay, we're cooking now." Like, we've
Ding.
turned on the gas. Yeah.
Yeah, had the light bulb moment.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Well, influential books. So, there's one that I'm reading right now, no familiar if you're familiar with it, but, Gustav Le Bon's The Crowd.
I'm not
Does that ring a
familiar with
bell?
it. Yeah, it does
Okay.
not.
Alright. So, for people who may not be familiar, the quick summation is an analysis of mob psychology written in 1895, which is sadly all too relevant today. And in the book, the Nazi framing was way more pronounced this time than in volume one. At least it felt that way to me, where the first volume was a little bit more like a window dressing to kind of play with folklore. And in this, with the Wild Hunt is kind of an analogy for the Nazis, but this time I don't wanna give away too much here, but the visuals clearly shift from that folklore focus to looking at the fascism of the Nazi party, and the parallels has to be something you were thinking about more, because that's overwhelmingly what I got out of my read.
I Yes. I mean, there's yeah, absolutely. I find that, like, and I was just talking about this on a panel actually this weekend, where, like, people were like, how are you worried about, like, referring to politics, in your work, making it seem dated?" Um, and I guess that, like, my answer to that was, by grounding like, we talked about a couple of books that seem timeless or that seem prescient now. The Hitler quote, the crowd. I recently did a rereading of Hannah Arendt's
Okay.
it's theories of fascism because she was she's got some great insights into it. And they thought they were free, which is interviews with a bunch of German civilians after World War II about being under the Nazi rule. And they feel very prescient to now, but they are very much grounded in the time that they were written. And I think that to me is the success of like doing the research and speaking to the cultural moment that you're writing about. And so
Yeah.
I very much like, it's hard not to be cognizant of living under fascism now, but I was very much like, if I write accurately about the fascism of Hans's time, it's going to reflect in the fascism thereafter. Because there are similar factors at play, and also because fascists do not have an imagination and they are running the same playbook because they only have one playbook.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what I saw. You had the Nazi party embracing pseudoscience like world ice theory. You have demonization of your enemies through political propaganda. You have an obsession with purity, insert whiteness. I mean, Trump's statement about undocumented immigrants poisoning the blood, like all these things seem to be exactly what we're dealing with now in 2026.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where I'm like, "Oh, that's what it sounds like in English. That's wild." Like, oh, no.
Wow, wow, that I had never thought of it like that, but, yeah, that's a very interesting lens. Whew.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get to something that's lighter than that then. So, with Hans himself, there's a further recognition of his past wrongs and this desire to confront a version of yourself that you want to change. So it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Now at around 50 myself, I spent a lot of wasted time trying to live up to this idealized version that I thought my family wanted me to be, and so I found myself empathizing, I guess, a lot more with Hans this time around. Was that something that you intentionally had designed or just where I'm at in my life?
I like kind of both.
Okay.
I think like this story had always been sort of intended to be a dissection of Hans as a character. I think on some level we put parts of ourselves into every character we have, and Hans especially. I think that there are certainly parts of me um in him that I am able to go like, okay, let's take a little scalpel and get in here and deal with some stuff. And I think Hans in the first volume is very much a 22-year-old who just died, right? And
Mhm.
he's shocked and appalled and he's not sure where he is and he's not sure what he's doing. And Hans in volume 2 has had a bit of a minute to sit with being dead, and being in this new world, and he's no longer just sort of purely reacting to things, and now he gets a little moment uh, to figure out what his goal of being a hero means, and what that like, being a hero is a good goal to say out loud, but it doesn't actually really mean anything, and also it's, uh, something that doesn't, come with instructions, and it's hard to live up to in the moment. And especially for Hans, for whom the term hero has a specific connotation coming from the Nazi party, he has to kind of take a step back and go, okay, what if I was raised to think of the expectations of a hero being, being violent, being a warrior, dying for your country, and I've already done that, and it turns out I'm still miserable, and I'm still freaked out, and I'm still here. What who do I what do I do? And that to me is sort of the interesting part. And I think this is it's the second in a trilogy, right? So he gets to hit rock bottom, and that's the part where you gotta go before you can start going up.
Well, dealing with those versions of yourself and perception. I remember when we were chatting about volume one and it was Reineke the Fox, and you were like, wait for it, more or less. And so you're kind of playing around with the notion of lycanthropy in a way. And it's just in a way I haven't seen before, so maybe lycanthropy is not exactly the right word, but, generally in that corpus, we're falling into themes of puberty, the id, queerness, power. Lots of analysis, though, here of personal perception, like the way we see ourselves, the way we see others. You talked about in Poland, in the forest, how German officers were seeing there's no difference between people and animals. So I think that's a really nice framing to kind of walk through the way you did those versions, human, animal, in the story itself.
One of the things that I was fascinated by when I was studying, like, Nazi war crimes in college, was the use of language by the people perpetrating them, because there was a clear tension between the idea that these people who were continuously telling themselves that they were doing what was right, um, and then believing that it was the right thing to do, and the clear discomfort they were having with it, between, like, the suicide rates of the German soldiers that were doing especially, like, the early genocides before the camps were built, the frontline guys, the occupying guys, there was a clear discomfort in what with what they were doing that they kind of were tiptoeing around expressing, um, and one of the things that was reflected in was the language that they used to refer to the people that they were killing. The euphemism usage in, like, personal diaries, but also in official reports was what really, like, got to me when I was first reading them. Like the fact that they
Okay.
can't even put down what they were doing. Even though they were like, this is the morally correct thing, they can't put down the word like corpse. Like the word that they use sort of translates to almost like a marionette, like a doll, like a body,
Okay.
but like there's something that's like artificial about it.
Yeah.
And the word for corpse was like not allowed. Like you were not allowed to say it. And that's kind of like what I wanted to get across in a way, in a sort of fairy tale refracted way with Hans, in that he is from the first time we meet Reineke, she has said, "I am not a fox." But we've only seen her as a fox because we've seen Hans's point of view, and, like,
Right.
playing with the internal tension where Hans, even to other people, will say she's not a fox because he is on some level trying to make her happy, but on another level, he still sees her as a fox. And the breakdown of that and sort of Hans's personal realization of how he sees her, how she sees herself, the tension and differences there, and also the potential reason why he can't take her seriously when she says who she is a central theme to their relationship, which I think is the beating heart of this book. Yeah, I've been waiting for a very long time to get to the meat of this, and I'm very excited about talking about the two of them, without going into too many spoilers, but, yeah, their relationship is very special to me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I was thinking about how we do this without thinking about it too in our society, right? How we use language and we use these comparative animal metaphors. She's a social butterfly. Somebody's always describing me as a night owl, and it's really fascinating to hear the background there because, again, I didn't have a whole lot of a background with talking about the Nazis and trying to use these different framings of language. So I haven't ever quite seen it played out this way. So was that how did you go about then choosing how you were going to do that? Like the choices of animals, because you're now doing this visually as comics is a visual medium. So I haven't seen it done like this.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions like, "Were you inspired by Mouse?" And I think
Okay.
that, I mean, I love Mouse. Mouse was absolutely influential in, like, my decision to make comics, but I think that Spiegelman and I are going different directions with the animal people metaphor. His is a lot sort of more one to one. We're absolutely both playing with the time honored propaganda tradition of turning your enemies into animals. But I think one of the things that I wanted to have in my the dehumanization, literally dehumanization, is I wanted to make it a little more subtle by choosing animals that weren't necessarily, um, like, off the bat recognizable as, like, a bad thing. Most of
Okay.
the animal people in the background of the world are farm animals,
Yeah.
because that's, like, sort of a neutral, their sheep and pigs are not maybe the most, like, nice things to call people, but, like, in the grand scheme of things, they aren't, like, the most evil things to call people either. Reineke is a fox because foxes, are in folklore seen as shifty, they are
Right.
tricksters, they are liars, but she's also a kid, so she looks like a fox. People comment in the story about the expectation of foxes. But as a person, Reineke is, a 12-year-old. She's impatient. She loves beetles. She's really interested in insects. She's very loyal. She's a little bit anxious about people leaving her because she has been abandoned in the past. Um, she's, like, funny. She's, very smart. She's very astute. And she's very, like, once she gets an idea in her head, she's very dedicated to seeing it through, no
Mhm.
matter what, which is sort of antithetical to Hans, who is used to having to be ready to cut and run at any moment. Hans is very much a like if shit is scary, hit the bricks. Because that has been his survival mechanism for a very long time. So between the two of them, he's sort of saddled with because he knows that like leaving Reineke is bad. Objectively, if he's trying to do better, he's like, I can't leave this 12-year-old kid on her own. Probably that's not good. But trying to make it work, is also complicated to him because he kind of doesn't really have a lot of social interactions with people that aren't like a chain of command. So there will be times where he's like, I am the authority figure, I'm older than you, I'm telling you what to do in sort of a big brother way. And there are times where he's like, this kid is telling me what to do and there's nothing I can do about it. I've been given an order and I simply have to do it. And that is kind of funny to me as well. Hans appears as a wolf in book 1 briefly, and he it's his wolfishness is also a deliberate choice because wolves are very fraught characters in fairy tales. It's a very loaded image. But also the wolf as an animal, a literal animal to me uh is a Hans as a wolf is sort of a double-edged sword in that other people around him see him as um a scary, evil, the bad guy, the consumer of children. But on the other hand, as several other background characters note, a wolf is also in many ways an undercooked dog. It is a canid that hasn't been domesticated yet.
Right.
They're not quite as useful as dogs. They're not they're still wild. They aren't ready for human society. So he's simultaneously big and scary, but he's also um like kind of a letdown, kind of a failure. And that I think is interesting. He's not quite either of them. And I think that's like the main point of all of the animal characters is that they can't fit into the skin that other people have put around them as animals because they aren't animals, they're people.
Yeah, I got the Nazi associations too. So Hitler's Ukrainian headquarters was the werewolf. His
Yes.
other well-known one was the Wolf Lair. There were guerrilla
Yes.
units that were operated behind enemy lines that were called the werewolves. So,
Yes. Werewolf as a term for a guerrilla unit in the German, like, military history goes back to the Napoleonic Wars, where the Werewolf, was a short story about a sort of heroic German revolutionary who stands up to Napoleon's occupying forces. In German, it's actually a kind of delightful pun. Wer means like man, so man wolf. But Wehr means like weapon, as in like Bundeswehr is like the German federal army. So
okay.
the title of the story is Wolf, in that he's a werewolf, but he's also like a military werewolf. It's it makes it's a good pun. It's a really good pun. In my script, I refer to Hans as a werewolf with the like military context because I think that's very funny. And also that is very much the imagery that I am trying to play with. But also a lone wolf is just kind of sad, right? The wolf can't really live
Yeah,
without anyone else,
the
and
pack.
he's the only one there. Yeah.
Yeah, that relationship between the two of them. One of the things, despite the overlay of fascism, despite, this kind of being focused with Nazi Germany, you counter that thematically. You kind of go in the opposite direction with the narrative. So fundamental to it is the kindness of strangers and the idea that if you open yourself up to others, that it can surprise you. You can learn something about yourself by being empathic to other people. And I really like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I one of the my favorite like trends in folklore is this idea that like the kindness that you give comes back to you. Um and that I think more than anything. I think a lot of a lot of ink has been spilled about fairy tales as moralistic, which I, pros and cons, much to unpack there. But I find
Right.
it very interesting that a lot of the morals that people say we're supposed to learn from fairy tales are like, listen to your elders, when I think that a
Finger
far
wagging.
more, yeah, like a far more popular theme that I have seen in my study of fairy tales is this idea that being kind to people, helping a beggar, feeding an animal, greasing a squeaky gate. There are many instances of squeaking a gate, like oiling a squeaky gate that then later comes back to help you. Being kind to a doll, being kind to things, whether they are animals, plants, inanimate objects, people, all of this, it's never wasted, and it always comes back to you in some form or another. And I think I don't that's really resonated with me in real life as well.
So
I
the
think we need
different
more of that.
phases of the oh, absolute 100%. And you've got 3 books here. So you have the kind of different themes that are kind of evolving, and you're still using, fairy tale to, folklore to do that. You were just talking about how the finger wagging element, and there was a little bit more of that in book 1. This seems to be more of the fairy tale. We're getting a little bit more Disney. Is that by design?
What? Never accuse me of getting more Disney. I think that there are a couple of fairy tales that I use for this one that are me whipping out some personal favorites.
Okay.
I guess I'm not really, other than like a happy ending potentially. Was what is I'm curious what you mean by like getting more Disney about it. Like
Well, you have
less gnarly.
the I don't, maybe it's just there's a German castle. Like maybe there's a German
Many such
castle. There are
cases.
these y- true, but it's not as dark, right? It is not that Baba Yaga's hut element. You're going to be eaten. Oh shit, we've got to get out of here. This has a whole lot more of the relationship between Hans and Reineke is one of characters that are actually getting to know each other. There's sympathy and empathy that is happening, and in that way, it's a much more softer presentation than I felt like book 1 was. And I think the visuals actually have a whole lot to do with my perception of it. And you've really stepped up to me as an artist in book 2. I'm seeing a lot more silhouette work that is complex and creatively defined. There's a broader use of playing with panel framing and angles, and the character acting is more nuanced. So you very much leveled up, and that may be where I'm taking a lot of that too with the presentation alone. It just doesn't feel as dark.
Yeah. I think, like, there are a couple of angles to that, and one is that, a big theme of volume 2 is that, appearances are deceiving, or
Sure.
appearances can be deceiving, and I wanted this book to be like, volume 1 is very dark, just, like, visually, it's a lot of
Yeah.
it is set at night, it is scary, and it also appears scary, I wanted volume 2 to be more, uh, nuanced and, like, tricky, so to speak. Hans is learning to see through things that appear one way and are actually another. So there are a lot of environments that seem friendly. There is a friendly and familiar castle. There's a friendly and familiar king. There's a friendly and familiar princess. But if you look a little bit deeper, there's something going on with all of them. There's, characters who are offering help who maybe have ulterior motives. There are characters who appear hostile, but are perhaps not as hostile on the inside as they are on the outside. Like a lot of it is sort of Hans having to make active decisions about how he is going to deal with people, and Reineke also making decisions about how she is going to deal with people, after a first book that was more or less pretty. It ends on the ending of the first book is sort of Hans's first, foray into having to make a decision, sort of a snap decision, about a situation that appears one way and is actually another. And that is sort of intended to lead us onto this this other road, especially given that the politics of fascism revolve almost entirely around aesthetics, which is like true then, it's true now. And the world appearing bright and cheerful and sunny, but being in many thematic ways much darker than volume
Mhm.
one was something that I absolutely wanted to play with because I think thematically this book is a lot is a lot darker than than the previous book. But if you have it with sunshine and a nice setting, you know, it's sort of the uncanny that I love, the unheimlich, if to quote the original German. Thanks, Dr. Freud. But he was cooking with some things. He was wrong about a lot of things, but the unheimlich, he did have a lot of stuff going on. And I think that the interesting thing about the word unheimlich, if I can go on a bit of a linguistics rant, is that Heim
Go for
in
it.
German means home. Like Heimat is like your home, but it also has the connotation of like homeland. It's a very loaded word in German.
Clearly.
So
Yep.
uncanny in English doesn't quite capture unheimlich because unheimlich is something that is like off of what you consider to be right and correct and just and where you live and the people that are around you. And I think that that is like what I wanted to encapsulate, play with in this book where Hans is going through a lot of things that are familiar in a lot of ways, but just rotated maybe like 10 degrees. And that's enough to make it a little bit something's off. Something's wrong.
No, I get exactly what you're saying. The illustration that came to mind while I was reading it is you might have a, a paramilitary fascist group running around in your like, okay, they're somewhere, they're in rural Alabama. Okay, they're there, but they're staying in their place. It's quite another one to see one marching down, the streets of Washington, D.C. In the middle of the day. There's 200 dudes who are all outfitted the same way, wearing swastikas. And that is so much more jarring uh, than thinking about them hiding in the shadows. And one of the things I thought was very clever here, um, y- the birch tree and the eyeballs that were on them. It's a boom. It's in your face in that same way. It's much more scary. Yeah, eyes always creep me out on things. They're just so
They're
fragile.
creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, when you see them exposed, they're not recessed behind, your super orbital torus
Yeah.
and all that jazz. But yeah, no, I get exactly what you're saying about it. In many ways, it is far scarier to expose these things to the light and to be forced to confront them in our safe spaces.
Yeah. And the birch tree character, Vitold, is one of my I know you're talking about it as an imagery, but, Vitold, the new one of the new characters in this book, has been one of my favorites for a very long time, so I'm very pleased to finally introduce him, to the world, 'cause he's a collaboration of a lot of, images that I personally find weird and disturbing. Eyes are definitely one of them. I've always found birch trees to be, like, kind of creepy in, like, a lot of Slavic folklore. Baba Yaga can see through the eye knots on a birch tree or on an aspen tree.
Gotcha.
Um, and I wanted to kind of tap into that, and I was a little bit like, "What are things that are, like, weird and off-putting to me, and how can I put them into this character who" um, it's minor spoilers, is not maybe the he's certainly not the worst guy, in this book.
Well, I wanted to know too, the Leshy, is that a way, because I'm not super familiar with those, my a lot of my frame of reference is here Native American kind of folklore stuff. So is
Mhm.
that also a way traditionally to talk about gender and gender roles and queerness?
Yes,
Okay,
100%. The Leshy in this book, he vetoed the Leshy. Leshy are forest spirits. They're usually the commander of like they're in charge of a forest. They take care of everything that is within it. They have sort of a protective. They can also be kind of they can be malevolent if you're doing things you shouldn't in a forest. If you're a poacher, if you're taking things that you shouldn't. But generally, the worst that they do is sort of play tricks on people in Slavic folklore. Vitold also comes like he's also drawing from the Schrat, which is a German sort of forest spirit, very similar powers and abilities. Leshy are always male. There is a female
Okay.
Leshy, and it's called a Leshyka. So there are female forest spirits, the Leshy, the Leshyka. They're very gendered. Vitold has a wife, who we haven't met yet, and he's looking for his wife. He's a big wife guy, our Vitold. But the Schrat is kind of fun because it's affiliated with the folklore tradition of the wild man, who is in the most famous example is in Iron Hans, which most people have heard a variation of. There's a wild man in the forest. He gets captured by a king, and he's put into a cage, and a prince has to decide whether or not he's going to release the wild man and go and live with him or stay with his father, the king. Um, Spoilers for a fairy tale, I guess. But like it's sort of there's a lot of again a lot of ink has been spilled about it as a about the wild man as sort of an alternative a symbol of alternative masculinity.
Okay.
He's not part of society. He lives in the woods. He's part of nature. And if the prince is like a young boy and he has to decide that this fairy tale is about him deciding between, following the path that is set out for him, the path that is expected of him in society, following the traditional authority figure of his father, or as the wild man represents this finding your own path, being successful on your own terms, this rejection of traditional masculinity and traditional society. And it's one of my favorite fairy tales for that reason. And Vitold is very much this in this role of the wild man. He is a an alternative form of authority and masculinity that Hans has seen certainly growing up in Nazi
Yep.
Germany, but also that he has seen represented in this fairy tale world. And I kind of want to play with that, especially given one of the other features of the Leshy that they are famous for is transformation. They can transform into any shape that they like,
Mhm.
um, which is something that uh, is very queer. Like you can't really get around that. There is it's interesting to me that there is this sort of like gender binary of the Leshy and the Leshyka, but you also have like Leshy can turn into, a male or a female animal. They can do whatever they want. They can be the size of a giant, they can turn down to the size of a blade of grass. Who can say? Who's gonna tell him? He's a like unkillable forest spirit. You're gonna tell him how to present his gender? Absolutely not.
Yeah, it was a really interesting mirror to kind of use him for Hans's own growth. Yeah, yeah, I dig that. Well,
Well, yeah.
talking about spilling ink as a visual storyteller, I find it fascinating how you do scene transitions, right? You spend a lot of time with the journey, like going from here to there. So often in comics, we get what I'll call panel maxing, where everything is optimized for page count, and we get to enjoy in the freedom of a graphic novel here, where those things aren't as concerning, or maybe they are. Like, did you get shit from the editor for, like, how big? Because this one's longer than the first one by a lot.
They are exactly the same length, actually.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay, well,
yeah,
alright, I'm wrong. I'm
yeah.
corrected.
No, I my editors are very nice. They let me be weird and freaky on the pages. Um, but yeah, I love a good and maybe this is because I love like old stories, like ancient stories, medieval stories, and I love a journey. I love getting places. I love the sort of weirdness of being on the road and being in unfamiliar places. I love the in-betweenness of it. There's a, like, kind of uncertainty there that I find to be very narratively interesting. Um, and a lot of the stories that, like, I draw big inspiration from for these books, not necessarily the fairy tales, but a lot of the sort of like surrealist post-war German literature that I'm a big fan of has to do with these like in between spaces because a lot of them were written, after the war and everyone's hometown has been destroyed and you have to go you can't stay here. You got to go somewhere and that sort of existential uncertainty, this loss of your home, this loss of Heimat is like not only has your homeland been destroyed, but it also betrayed you before that. And that sort of like transgression reflected in characters not being grounded in a place is very interesting to me. I wanted very much to have the fairy tale world sort of feel transient and feel, um, sort of a step back from the literal traveling is reflective of the emotional traveling that the characters are doing. They are
Okay.
constantly changing places physically, but also, and more importantly, they're changing places, like, within in their minds, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot about that, the sort of amorphous liminal space of, you make America great again, okay? Comes
Yes.
to mind where there is this halcyon days time, whenever that was, when everything was grander, was better, was, this idyllic kind of setting, and a fairy tale as a way to explore that, which the fairy tale classically always has these associations with, okay, we'll go back to Disney, right? It's the Disney metaphor. It's this, it's kind, it's Skittles, whatever, what have you. But it never is. You peel back the layer, and even what's going on with Disney is always some family tragedy, found family. You're finding yourself, you're finding your place. Um, and I think that's just a fascinating overlay to explore with a, a classic in ways, right? Because you're looking at Nazi Germany, but it's also, again, very modern with all these things that we're dealing with now. And I don't know if you read a lot of like modern German literature, but is that idea, that liminal space, the space in between looking for home, is that something that they write a lot about now?
Not in the books that I have, been reading from modern German literature, but a lot of the books that I've read from modern German literature have not, been in the genre. I think that I would be ecstatic to find, more if people are still sort of doing the weird post-war surrealism, but I think that that has sort of fallen a little out of vogue, which makes sense. I do think that it largely comes from the lived experiences of the people who wrote it. Um, but, like, I think that one of the things that you're sort of hinting sort of touching on here that I think is interesting is, something that I have also one of the sort of inciting thoughts of this, and I'm sure the inciting thoughts of this post-war, surrealism as well, is that fascism requires, this idyllic mythic past, right? And
Yeah,
the similarity between this idyllic mythic past and the idyllic mythic past of the once upon a time, um, that I is a clear one is more honest about its fantasy than the other.
sure,
Um, and I think also, the interesting thing to me is that not a lot of fairy tales take place in this mythic past. A lot of folk tales take place in a very grounded, literal, um, that castle just over there. So like, and a lot of them take place in like specific years as well. The Bear Skinner is one of my favorite stories, and it is specifically in the 30 Years' War. The main character is a veteran of the 30 Years' War, which is a lot more specific than I think a lot of fairy tales are dare to be when they're being very coy about like, "Oh, princess of a kingdom long ago." And
Sure.
I yeah, it's an interesting Lego click there. I don't really know if I had a point about that, but
No,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it is just an interesting place to play with because you have the mingling in these stories, and it's why I love them so much. Is you take Grimm, and it has that timeless exactly what you're talking about. There's a castle that is just out there, and it's always been here, right? Sure, we'll buy into that. And when the reality is with geopolitical conflict and everything, I mean, castles were built. Why? Castles were fortifications. It was basically, I'm gonna stake my place here. This is, my ground, and, it's circling the wagons. I'm gonna create this little fiefdom, and, I just I don't know. It's a lot of, return to same, which is, yeah,
There's a divorcing of, like, the present reality and the past under fascism that I think is very interesting that, like, in real life, things cause other things. There's a reason
sure,
for everything. There's a reason why this castle was built. There's a reason why, the river flows this way, whether that is a physics reason or a geopolitical reason or a historical reason or whatever. But uh, under fascism, one of the lies that they are trying to sell you is that things just happen. Things just are. Things just happen because they should happen, and like that, you can't be doing that. That's not how the world works. It's not a like people just get sick because they're morally weak. It's not because of germs that are going through the air or like not masking in public or because of
right,
a failure of public health systems, like all of these things. People are poor because they're morally weak, not because of any kind of economic systems that exist or historical factors or whatever. And if you try to point out the fact that these problems have roots that are caused by specific actions and they can be fixed by other specific actions, well, that's going against the natural order of things. And the natural order of things is just what is currently benefiting them now.
So how do you not get tripped up when you're working on this? How do you maintain your true north, whatever that is? I mean, and maybe there's not one. I don't know. Is there?
Yeah, I like Reineke and Hans's relationship to me is the true north of this.
Okay.
Like to me, there is a beating heart in there. And I think that that's like if I'm ever kind of lost in the weeds about something, I have like a chart that I set up and it's like what is Hans thinking in the scene? What is Reineke thinking in the scene? What does Hans want in the scene? What is Reineke thinking in the scene? And, like, what is Hans afraid of in this scene, and what is Reineke afraid of in this scene? And I go through those 3, I guess, 6 things. Um, and at that point, then usually I can orient myself into, like, yeah, okay, I know how this is going to go. And if I can throw in, you know, a monster or a weird guy or a something redacted, whatever, then all the better for it. But I have them they're kind of the fixed points around which everything kind of rotates,
Okay. Okay.
even as they're
That's the
walking around.
nucleus.
Yeah.
Well, talking about halcyon days and when things were better in TV, when we were back in 2021, you mentioned pulling from Hogan's Heroes. So one of my favorite
Yes.
old TV shows. Are there any in volume two? Because I looked, but it's been a hell of a long time since I watched that series.
I don't think I have any cameos from
Okay.
them. I do have a Great Escape cameo, though,
Okay.
which is a
I'll
bit of
have
a
to.
deep cut. Hans goes into a cafe in an interchapter in a friend in Paris during the occupation, and the waiter of the cafe where Hans goes into is based off of the waiter in the cafe in The Great Escape, who gets the phone call about the French resistance at a critical point in the movie. I don't know how recently people have seen that movie. It's a great movie. I highly recommend it. Um, but yeah, I have there's a Colonel Clink and a Sergeant Schultz cameo in the first one, but
Yep.
I didn't get around to I didn't have a lot of background characters gonna play with in this one, so
Yeah. I mean, you could have Radar. You got to get Radar in there somehow. That's
yeah, I know. There's a volume 3, so I'll pull
there
in
you go.
there somewhere.
I'll look for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on that, volume 2 publication date I have is August 4th. Is that still accurate?
Yes. Still accurate. Next Tuesday, 1 week from today when we were recording.
Woohoo!
Woohoo.
We'll go out on
Yay.
Friday, so this will be out and people can get it next week.
Yes. Still very
And
exciting.
people,
I'm so stoked.
well, everybody should pick Sierra's book up at your LCS or your favorite bookstore, not at Barnes and Noble because they're bastards and they like AI books, which blows my mind. But we won't get off on that
So
tangent.
gross.
But yes, call your shops. Make sure to pick the book up because I'm a big fan. When can we? Are you working on volume 3 or right now? Or
I am. I have started working on volume 3. I have plans to send the initial like drafts, overviews, got some new character sketches and stuff in August, so I'm very excited about that. I can't believe that it's going to be the last volume. I'm like having a lot of big feelings about it because I've been working on this project for a real long time.
this is an interesting parallel that I'm hearing with me and letting my child go off to college, and you putting your baby out into the world, and eventually you'll have to shut
Um,
the door with that chapter and be like, okay, it's done. So,
my horrible son is going off into the world. Awful child. Yeah.
but you have multiple children because you have Hans and Reineke.
I do, I know. My horrible son and my beautiful daughter who's never done anything wrong in her life. She's perfect. I'm proud of her.
Well, let's jump into my shout out. So, this is something that inspired you recently, or someone you want to acknowledge who did something nice for you. And I'll go first to give you a minute to think about it. I don't know if you listened to that episode of Dan Snow's History Hit podcast that I sent you about gladiators.
I did. That was great.
What'd you think? You liked
I
it?
was so fun. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if fun is maybe the right word, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah,
Fun
that
for,
was pretty wild. I didn't know that gladiators basically the that whole bit about them being fed, I think it's barley and beans to fatten them up
yeah.
so that they would have more subcutaneous fat so they could be cut and would bleed profusely, but it wouldn't be any kind of mortal wound. I was like, "Oh, that is such a tidbit. That's so good."
I know. I was like, are we going to get a gladiator diet fad coming out soon? All those,
Probably.
get those podcast pros on it. Tell them, eat like your gladiator ancestors. Wheat and beans, barley and beans.
Barley and beans.
That doesn't sound
But,
very fun.
but anyway, that's my shout out. I've been
Yeah.
listening to lots of podcasts about history recently, and I love that show. So, yay, I'm glad you got a chance to check it out.
Yeah. I thank you for it because I've been inking a new project and I love listening to podcasts when I'm inking on things. So it was very helpful. I guess my things that I was inspired by, I finally sat down and read all of Golden Kamuy by Satoru Noda, the manga. And it's been finished for a while. I just haven't gotten around to it. And I got a cabin in the woods for a couple of days and just like binged a bunch of reading, which was awesome. And what a great manga! What a great time! I feel like in the grand scheme of things, I feel like Golden Kamuy is pretty popular, but in terms of like historical research, incredible. The characters are so good. The story is really engaging. They really like kicked ass on the landing. I wasn't sure how the story was going to end because it goes all over the place, literally, metaphorically, grammatically, spiritually. But wow, I've just been chewing on it for like a couple weeks now, and I keep finding things that I really like about it. And it's very cool to read a comic that makes you just feel like, hell yeah, comics are so good. Comics are so good. Wow.
See, I'm not familiar with that one. So what's the quick beat? Give me the gist.
The quick beat is it's a sort of action adventure historical fiction about a group of mishmashed I j I don't even know how to describe them. In the north of Japan, the Ainu people have been stockpiling gold in order to try and buy enough land to let them be a sovereign nation. The Russo-Japanese War has just ended, and the Japanese government, high on its own supply, is modernizing the country. Word gets out about this hidden Ainu gold, and a group of Japanese imperial soldiers who want to, like, take over Japan, a group of, like, former samurai who want to establish their own republic, and a third group, including a Serpa, an Ainu girl, and Sugimoto, who is a former soldier turned gold prospector who is trying to get enough money to help his beloved get eye surgery in America, all try to find this gold. It's wild. It is crazy. It's got a ton of it, like very good information about like the Ainu people, about turn of the century Japanese culture and history. Um, there's human tattooed skins, weird
Okay.
taxidermy, horse racing, um, like cannibalism. It's great. It's wild. I
Okay. Like
cannot recommend it
cannibalism. I'm
enough.
sold.
Yeah.
We'll check this out.
What's a little like cannibalism between friends? I mean, yeah,
Uh, an infection. That's what that is.
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Sierra, it's always a pleasure getting the chance to hang out and catch up and like cannibalism with you.
Byron, always. You're always invited over to my place for dinner.
Oh, I'm seeing
I had to, I'm sorry.
no, 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 it's good. Now I've got
Um,
visions of, oh my God, why is his name Mads Mikkelsen like in
oh,
my head?
Hannibal Lecter, yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I feel I don't know, there's something wrong with like replacing Anthony Hopkins in my head as that role, but Mads he's one of my favorite actors. I
I
absolutely
do love
adore
Mads
him.
Mikkelsen. Yeah, he's
So good.
great.
So good.
I haven't seen Hannibal, but I did see the original, so he's still in my head as Anthony Hopkins. I love his little
Have you
it's
seen
just
Valhalla Rising yet?
no, I haven't. I'm behind. It's because I've been trying
Okay.
to ink this project so
Well,
much.
if you get a chance, Valhalla Rising is one of my favorite movies. It is
Okay.
there's a brutality to it that Mads portrays that it's in cinema, violence, of course, is so epic, and we make it epic, and because it is the rawness of real violence is just something that it's like changing the language, right? Because our brains
Yeah.
can't quite digest it. It's just too visceral, and this really leans into that. So it's not um it is a tough watch, I'll put it that way, but
Okay.
it's one of the best that I've ever seen at just an accurate portrayal of what violence in its squelchiness really would feel like. You got to sit in it, and it's uncomfortable.
Well, I gotta say, it's an uncomfortable watch is like a good, like, salad. You're like, "Yeah, I need to, like" I enjoy maybe not, like, the experience of doing it, but having something to then chew on for a while, like, that's yeah, I got some of my favorite movies and books that I'm like, loved it, think about it often, don't know if I could ethically recommend it, probably won't watch it again for another 10 years. That's yeah, you gotta have
Yeah,
space for
the
that.
one of my favorite books is Brahms, the illustrator, who also is a writer, but he's got a book called The Child Thief, and it is very much that way. So it is taking the real Peter Pan myth and portraying that in a more realistic light. Now, I'll leave it there because I don't want to give a whole lot of stuff away. But it is not the
Gnarly.
Disney version of Peter Pan, and you got to sit in it. So good stuff.
Hell yeah.
But this is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Peace.